All right, so we are going to talk about blood cell diseases today. Our goal is to be able to describe the causes and effects of blood cell disorders, so identifying the causes of them and also their symptoms. So we talked previously about where new blood cells are made. Do you remember where they're made? They're made in the bone marrow, so inside of your bones. One of these diseases that we're going to talk about has to do with blood cells being made. And sometimes when we make these new blood cells using mitosis, they divide uncontrollably. If you remember from first semester, cells that divide out of control are called cancer cells. So this is a problem, and it can lead to something called leukemia. So if you think about what blood cells we have, we've got white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. In leukemia, it's the white blood cells that are dividing out of control. Now, the white blood cells, those are fighting off foreign invaders like bacteria, viruses, and you might think that having more of them would be a good thing. The problem is that in these cancerous versions, they don't work very well. So the cancerous cells, they don't fight diseases like the normal white blood cells. So in turn, what we end up having is just a lot of white blood cells that don't really work. So we're going to go in our notes to this chart. We're going to read these causes or descriptions and figure out, where does leukemia go? And you'll notice leukemia goes right here because it's cancer of the bone marrow. Many white blood cells are formed, but few are functional. So we're going to write leukemia here. And then we're going to think about, if someone had a lot of white blood cells that didn't work, what symptoms might they have? So if you remember, white blood cells fight bacteria and viruses. What symptoms might they have? Well, if they can't fight off bacteria and viruses, they're probably going to be sick a lot. So go ahead and write down that they'll get sick easily or frequent infections, something like that, in the symptoms box. Now, in class, we did this where we predicted the symptoms for all of these disorders. Okay, we're going to just run through them, and I'll tell you them rather than having you brainstorm then. So for low hemoglobin, remember that hemoglobin makes up red blood cells. And so if we don't have a lot of the building blocks to make red blood cells, we're going to be tired really easily. We might also be lightheaded because we're not getting enough oxygen. Cancer of the bone marrow, we just did this one. You might be sick, have a lot of infections. If we don't produce enough platelets for blood clotting, what might happen is we can't clot our blood, so we can't form clots and we'll end up bleeding a lot. If our red blood cells are the wrong shape, they're not going to function as well as they normally do. They don't have as much space for oxygen. So again, someone's going to be tired or lightheaded. Missing a clotting factor that helps blood clot. So a clotting factor is one of those proteins or chemicals that helps our blood clot. And if we're missing that, we are also not going to be able to form clots and we'll have lots of bleeding. So now that we know these symptoms, what I had the students do in class is research these diseases and write down where they go. We're just going to fill in the chart here. So the disease where we have low hemoglobin and can't make enough red blood cells is called anemia. You might also hear it called iron deficient anemia because it's typically caused by a lack of iron. So here's a picture. We've got our normal red blood cells, normal hemoglobin. Here we don't have enough hemoglobin, so we have fewer red blood cells. Leukemia, we already talked about, cancer of the bone marrow. The next one is called thrombocytopenia. This is when we don't have enough platelets, and so our blood can't clot normally. So we're going to go ahead and write that one down here. So thrombocytopenia. If our red blood cells are misshapen, it's caused by a genetic mutation, and it's called sickle cell anemia. This is a sickle shape, and it causes a lot of issues because these blood cells don't flow through normal blood vessels as easily. They kind of get jammed up. So sickle cell anemia is going here. And then if you're missing a clotting factor, this is called hemophilia. And so normally we get this net and we get this clot and this scab forming, but if we're missing that protein, somebody ends up continually bleeding and they're unable to form those scabs. So here is how that disease chart should look.